Okay, I'm loving the internet right now. We're going to try this again. I'm your host, Michael Kopf, and welcome to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. Today, I am very blessed to have a guest who not only was my very first guest of this show, but has made an appearance every season on this show. So, a man who needs no introduction, but just to say he is a giant among men, not just in actual appearance, but in stature as well. I give you the one, the only information extraordinaire, Brad Olsen.
Hey, Michael. Thanks for the introduction. That's quite nice. Yeah, season 4. We have done every season, including your first show. That's quite an honor to be asked back each time. So thanks for having me on.
Well, the honor is mine to have you on, and every time you are on my show, it's just an awakening of knowledge, and I just how you have all this information is just astonishing to me, and I am so grateful that you're sharing it with us and with the world. And so I do want to say right off the bat, thank you for what you do for humanity.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
And with that being said, we were talking about what topics to cover, and I'm excited for this topic because I actually came up with a question I'm not sure you've ever been asked.
Ooh.
And the topic we're going to be talking about is black goo and the real reason for the Falkland Wars. And you can get into the black goo if you want, but the question I have for you is, if the cabal is seeking this black goo to use, how are they protecting themselves from being affected by it?
Okay, great first question. And of course, my new book called Secrets of Antarctica, The Untold History of the Ice Continent, has a whole chapter on the black goo. And the reason why it's in the book on Antarctica is because between the Falkland Islands and Antarctica is a string of islands called the South Sandwich Islands. The southernmost is called Thule Island. And this is a Google Earth image, but you can see the little bit right there is blacked out. And that is where this base called Corbetta Uruguay base was located. And it was being run by the Argentinians who were studying the black goo in a frozen state. Now you see, it has to be in a perpetually frozen environment like South Thule Island for it to be safe to work on. And so that's why they set up a base there. And a lot of us have heard about the Falkland Wars in 1982. And this is a map from Wikipedia. A lot of people don't realize that the attack force broke into two groups. One went to fight in the Falklands, the other went to these southern islands. And it's always been a mystery why they would do that, why they would break off, and what was. Some of these islands are uninhabited and have little to no resources or people living down there. So what was the big deal? And the papers to sign for ending the war were on this ship right off the Corbetta Uruguay base that you can see there. So this is all leading to the question, what was the big deal about capturing this island and getting the black goo? And that's what it was all about. The whole Falkland Wars was fought over the UK taking this stuff back and backward engineering it. And they brought it back to a place called Marconi Laboratories. And in very high profile fashion, a lot of the scientists and researchers who were working on the black goo in Marconi Laboratories died of very mysterious causes. Some died in accidents, others were suicide, a couple went missing. It was just one of the most bizarre things. I mean, statistically, for that many scientists from one laboratory to die under very mysterious circumstances is hugely not
normal,
mathematically calculable as being high odds. That is very, very low odds that this would happen. But they were working on the black goo, and they don't really talk about that in the mainstream media when all these people started dying mysteriously. So what is the black goo, I think, is your second question. And what is it all about? Well, it was being studied because it can rapidly clone any living thing, not just humans, but even an extraterrestrial, or it could even clone animals. And so that's what the Argentinian researchers were working on. And they were trying to understand what this stuff was. So I'll read you a passage from the book. There is a strange sentient black oil that was discovered long ago in a cave on South Tool Island in the South Sandwich Island chain, located south and east of the Falkland Island group. The substance seems to have powerful mind control properties when sprayed or ingested. It may have a connection to the artificial life forms observed in the self-assembling nanobots in Morgellons. This was reportedly the real reason for the 1982 Falkland Wars between Argentina and Great Britain, so the military could take over the Argentinian base studying this black oil and take the substance back to the UK. The intelligent sentient oil was claimed to have been found after the destruction of a blue ET base on the frozen Thule Island, the southernmost of the South Sandwich Islands in the far South Atlantic, about 1,400 miles north of Antarctica. The black goo is an abionic mineral oil from the upper crust containing high amounts of M-state gold and iridium. The deposit on South Tool Island in the South Sandwich Islands is not the only location where it's been discovered. It has also been discovered under the Gulf of Mexico, and it's considered a demonic substance that has been acquired by the UK government and studied in the Marconi labs, apparently killed many researchers who are trying to understand the substance. Furthermore, there exists a black oil schist containing this type of oil from earlier tectonic events, leading some researchers to believe there are at least two kinds of black goo. These substances apparently broke up in the crust of the earth and are making their way out from the ocean floor via geothermal activity. The two known kinds of black goo are those that are organic and native to Earth, and those that were imported from off planet. And the South Thule Island black goo was that substance that was brought in from off planet. And so you would ask why? Ask why, Michael.
What? Yeah, if it is here, why would we bring in an extraterrestrial source of it unless there was a property of it that was absent in the natural sentient here on the earth?
Great question. And the reason is it goes all the way back to what is known as the Toba eruption. Is that an event that you've heard of? You know what I'm talking about?
Actually, I have to admit, this one's a new one on me.
Okay, it's also called the Toba catastrophe. And this is what it looks like on the island of Sumatra. This is a giant volcanic crater that was one of the largest volcano eruptions known on this planet 71,000 years ago. Why is that important? Well, when this eruption occurred, it created a nuclear winter, is what it's called now. If, say, we were all to have a nuclear war exchange and all these plumes of radioactive dust were to be put up. The Toba catastrophe theory holds that the eruption caused a severe global volcanic winter of 6 to 10 years and contributed to a 1,000-year-long cooling episode, resulting in a genetic bottleneck of humans. And this satellite image shows the caldera of Lake Toba with a resurgent dome forming Samosir Island. I actually got an opportunity to go there and backpack through Samosir Island. And it's also got a very unique distinction that on the island of Sumatra, you have this large island within the caldera of Lake Toba and Samosir Island here. And there's a little lake here on the island with a lake, and in that little lake is one other island. So it's what's called island cubed. Big island, Sumatra, smaller island, Samosir, surrounded by water, and then a tiny little lake with a little island in it. And I've only found one other location up in the Arctic area of Canada that has 3 islands. So back to the black goo. The reason why the Toba eruption was so important in this narrative of the black goo is because there was a researcher who wrote a series of articles in Nexus magazine about why this benevolent ET group brought it down here. You think, well, why would they bring something like that here? Well, this is from Coevolution and Interplanetary Adventure by Alec Newald. And in this series, he describes the benevolent ET motives as the Argentinian government was tasked in the mid-1970s to secure the entrance to the underground ET base when they set up the Corbeta Uruguay station in 1976. Control of the black goo may have been what the Falkland Wars was all about. He says, when we set up our bases on southern Thule, there was good reason for this. Not only was it isolated, which suited our work, but it was also infected beneath its surface what I would call a black plague. It is like a concentration of negative energy. We wanted to see if we could nullify this plague before it made its way to the surface by accident or design. It is easier to control it if it is kept near 0 degrees. So it is best to work with it in colder regions of your planet. Heat appears to be its friend. If we're ever released in the tropics, I don't think we could deal with it. And then he says, it was a setback to have our project at Southern Tool shut down, even after our friends in Argentina tried to help. So he's speaking on behalf of the ETs, the blue ETs that were also part of this. We have since moved to a new location where our work continues. It's not over yet. Perhaps one day you will know this, but never forget that we are not friends with the Stars and Stripes, which is the USA and the UK. If someone tells you that your ET brothers and sisters are coming to hold your hand, that these are coming to visit the Stars and Stripes, let it be said there's danger in the air, for this could never happen. So he's saying that the ET group brought this down here right after the Toba eruption because so few humans had survived. There were only enough people living in the decade after the Toba eruption that could fill a large sports stadium like Texas Stadium. Only about 40 or 50,000 humans on the whole planet. So this benevolent ET group thought, well, Earth could be taken over quite easily with only that few humans alive. And our destiny on Earth is for humans to be the leading sentient race on the surface. So it was brought here because it can be used to rapidly clone. And so in the event that there was an malevolent or hostile ET invasion and they were wiping out the last humans, they could clone the human race and then repopulate it rather quickly with this black goo substance. And it remained in this cave until the Argentinians got it. But I've got some information in the book that the Germans got there first as they were on their way down to New Schwabenland in South America and Antarctica to New Schwabenland, where I have gained the GPS coordinates that I turned over to several remote viewers to take a look. And all three of them independently came back and said, there's a giant cloning laboratory in this location in Antarctica, which happens to be in the New Schwabenland area. So that's how it all relates to Antarctica, relates to cloning, what the black goo is for, and also why the British wanted it so bad that they would forge a war under false pretenses against Argentina and the Falkland Islands just to gain this black goo. So then they bring it back to the UK, and that's when all hell breaks loose. Even by the time they were getting close to the equator, they could tell that this stuff was going to break loose. So just this last December, I got invited to speak at the Bases Conference in England, put on by Miles Johnston. And he is one of the leading researchers and voices of what the black goo is all about. And he's had several other eyewitnesses and leading authors like Harold Kotzvela and a guy named David Griffin, who was eyewitness and friends with people who were on the ship that took the black goo back to the UK. And when I was at this conference in December, I was on a panel with a couple other people from the German secret space program called Nachtwaffen. That's Penny Bradley and Drago Reed. And the topic changed to the black goo. And I asked Drago and Penny Bradley if they knew about the black goo and if it had anything to do with their service in the German Nachtwaffen secret space program. Both of them said that they were ingesting small amounts of the black goo because it would give them super soldier strength and stamina to deal with the enclosed environments of being off planet. And both of them have said, yeah, it made them even a lot more aware, a lot more sentient, telepathic, but also physically stronger after having ingested it. So I asked him, well, if you had a choice and you could take it knowing that it was going to give you these enhancements, or would you skip it? Both of them said they would do it. Just like they said, if you could do it all over again and not have to be subject to sometimes very difficult circumstances to be in these programs, would you do it all over again? Both of them said, yeah. So that's kind of interesting that even though they were put to the test and even subjected to sometimes very painful or dangerous situations, both of them think that it actually serves them well to have taken it. And so that's the weird story behind the black goo and why it's in the book in Antarctica, Michael.
Yeah, and I mean, I can understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, in the back of my mind, I keep hearing that voice of until it's not.
Right.
And then it's, how do you deal with it? And an interesting question I have for you around the black goo is if we have the so-called, like, as Star Trek The Next Generation puts it, skin of evil black goo, where it's, harmful, and then I guess a better way to put it is a negative state. How do we tell the difference between that one and the benevolent goo that's here to help us?
Yeah, that one is the $10 million question. I'm not sure how we can distinguish the two because they are very similar. And I don't even know the difference. Perhaps because they're both said to be sentient, meaning having a mind of their own, that the sentient black goo would be what these super soldiers ingested because it helped enhance them and it didn't make them feel like they had to commit suicide like the researchers in the super space program or in Marconi laboratories who were backward engineering and had all these scientists that died mysteriously. And I didn't distinguish, and I should have, but I don't know if they knew the difference between the two kinds and whether or not they knew if they took the benevolent kind or the malevolent kind. It's a good question to ask, and I would like to know the answer.
And another question is if only the freezing cold is how you can determine if it's there and, like, in essence, halt it. If people have been cloned and have this in them walking around the world today, how, do we need to put everybody into zero, but then even normal people would be frozen solid and stopped? And so how really can we determine how many people around have the goo in them and don't?
Well, and now we heard so much about world leaders being cloned, even some celebrities like Jim Carrey is like, who is that guy? That doesn't look like him. And then the other Jim Carrey pops out. He's like, yeah, it's me. Are they being cloned? Well, in these remote viewer reports, when they were looking at the cloning labs in New Schwabenland in Antarctica, all three of them independently said that there were recognizable clones being created, both politicians and celebrities. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's to control the narrative. And even the actor Jack Black,
Yes.
pretty famous. He's been in a bunch of movies. He even said one time that he was offered a role that he didn't want to take. And the answer was, if you don't take it, we'll just put in your clone to act in the role. That's a Jack Black quote. He's even saying he knew that there were clones of him because let's say it's like a Marvel or a movie about the military or something, because we all know that Hollywood is propagandized and part of this information campaign to control people's minds and steer the narrative. And they would put in a reproduction of that actor if they showed signs of not wanting to do it. So you can see why they would want to get celebrities cloned so that they can continue to put them in movies or roles that those people didn't want to do.
And another interesting question I have is with the portals we have around the world that activate due to frequencies of the individuals, if the black goo, let's say, for example, got into me and cloned me, would that clone be able to activate portals and tech here on the planet that I can activate because of my energy? Or would the portals be like, this is not the correct energy frequency, even though it looks like the person? Would it be able to distinguish the two?
Yeah, another good question, Michael. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I would suspect that it would be hard to know the difference. Well, some of these clones of politicians, they say Hillary Clinton had clones and that she died right after that 9/11. Remember when she was stumbling into a van and they drove her away?
Right.
Supposedly she died that day because a woman comes out of Chelsea Clinton's condo in New York City where she was taken, which, by the way, had a medical facility in it. And a woman comes out and it's clearly not Hillary Clinton. Kind of looks like her, but clearly not her. Was that a clone? Did that take center stage? Would that go to all the debates? And would they have put her in? Same thing with Joe Biden. They say Joe Biden died before the election in 2020. And the whole time it was his clone. But one thing about cloning is they need to be created in a laboratory or a test tube when the host is still alive. And if the host dies prematurely, like in the case of Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, that the clone starts to glitch out, that it makes these blunders and mistakes. And you could really see that with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And so they would have a problem with these clones just glitching out and making these really obvious mistakes. And they don't really live much longer either. A couple of years, but the glitching gets so bad that the systems basically fail. So the clones have a connection with the host. And so when the host dies, it's like they lose their part of their memories and part of their even their motor functions and the way that they would behave like the host did. And so this is how deep this rabbit hole goes. And the fact that these remote viewers discovered this cloning laboratory in the same GPS coordinates that I gave all three of them, to me, it just shows that something really weird is going on down there.
Definitely. And I can't help also wondering with the soldiers that were in, with fighting on the Falkland Islands and the other location, both of them, if they came exposed to the goo, would we even know it? And are they walking around unknowingly spreading this goo? And, or did they, encounter, beings that they were like, hey, we can't, every time we seem to knock this person down, they're getting back up somehow. Is that an effect of the goo, or did they even fight the goo? That's an interesting question of were there reports of strange anomalies with bodies.
Yeah, good point. I mean, hard to say to what extent we all might have a little of the black goo in us, because what has happened since Marconi Laboratories backward engineered it to use with super soldiers, this is all the way back in the 1980s, but it has since gotten to DARPA here in the US, and DARPA and others have been weaponizing the black goo, and they put it into graphene oxide, which can self-assemble nanobots within the body, taking on an artificial life form, also in the ferrofluids. And you got all these very, very strange new 21st century diseases and disorders such as Morgellons, which shows signs of being the black goo, that it'll come out in a substance that's black. And then you've got these fibers, which are like the graphene oxide, self-assembling nanobots in the body that are this artificial life form and are exploding out from people's skin. And this has all happened in the last 25, 30 years. So I think they're spraying us with it. It's coming down in the chemtrails. In fact, Sophia Smallstorm, she's a researcher in California. Every time it's a heavy chemtrail day, she'll put out a petri dish, especially if it rains right afterwards, and she'll catch this stuff. She'll put it under a microscope and she'll report on it. And she says definitely detecting nanobots and other very minuscule little robots, really. That's what they are, because once they self-combine, then they become another life form, just like the black goo does. The black goo is like that movie, The Blob. Remember that from the 1950s? I think they did a remake of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it would try to just envelop a person, and then they'd be lost, and the blob would get bigger and keep on going. So it's kind of like that, you know. Sometimes life imitates art and art imitates life, if you want to call it that. But it's a way that Hollywood can then tell the world what they're really up to. It's the telegraphing of the message. And that's an occultic thing here on Earth, that they have to tell us what they're doing to us. And then the black goo features in a lot of different movies, as well as in X-Files, that movie Prometheus, and the guy's even ingesting it. So they're telling us what they're up to in Hollywood. And this is called the revelation of the method. It's an occultic practice of telling us what they're doing to us. This goes a little deeper, because in the free will planet of Earth, we can't just put this stuff on us without knowledge that we are a free will population. And so we have to be informed, kind of like a law of the universe on a free will planet such as ours. And the way they'll do that, the way they'll inform us, is in Hollywood movies or music or television, even press releases from the government or academia that will announce what they're doing, but in a veiled kind of way. And that's the revelation of the method.
You know, and I find it interesting too, and I don't know if there's a correlation, but I can't help but think now of hearing that the lab, you know, that tested the black goo was in the UK, that we had Dolly, the sheep that was cloned in the UK, and
in the 1980s.
The story just disappeared. It's like we cloned a sheep and then it was like nothing. And so I'm wondering, was she cloned using the goo and an adverse effect happened that they didn't want to disclose? And so they were like, okay, quell the story. Story's over.
And you got to think, if they were cloning sheep and being very public with that knowledge in the media, that Dolly the sheep was a clone in the 1980s, can you imagine how much more advanced that technology has gotten now? If we weren't already cloning humans then, we're certainly doing it now. And the other thing that these remote viewers told me when they were looking at these cloning laboratories is they're combining DNA of humans and other animals and creating what are known as chimeras. And that's where they said this gets really dark and really upsetting when you see a dog or an animal with a human face being as expressive as we are, but in the body of an animal. And it just conjures up the image of a Pegasus or the mythical creatures like a minotaur from ancient mythology in the modern age in the form of these chimeras.
And I had an experience in the 90s. It was late 90s where I almost crossed paths with my doppelganger. I went into
Oh,
a
wow.
store that my mom was shopping at, and she couldn't go there. And all of a suddenly, she was like, "Yeah, we need to go and test and see what is going on." And while she was doing that, all of a suddenly I went to the store and the clerks go, "You were just here, like not even 10 minutes ago." And I always thought, oh, that was my doppelganger, the German word for twin or
Right.
opposite. And now I can't help wondering, is it a goo version of me? And if it wasn't for the fact that doppelganger is a term coined from the 1700s, I'd almost think, is this a way like you're saying that Germany was saying, "Hey guys, we got the goo. We're putting this out. So here's the term for it."
Yeah, I knew it was a German word, but you kind of put that connection together, and that's really interesting that doppelganger would be popularized by a German word. And in my book, I did find some research that the Germans were the first to get to South Thule Island, and they were also colonizing different areas, including the Falkland Islands. Because remember, right after World War II, or even during World War II, the Argentinians were very sympathetic to Nazi Germany. And after the war, a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of Germans who should have been on trial in Nuremberg for war crimes were getting new passports and going over what is called the rat lines to South America, largely to Argentina. And so you got these Germans that were already colonizing in the area and setting up camp in different places. And then you have even a much more different situation. So the study of occultism and transhumanism began as a government initiative in the early 1930s under the new Nazi Party. A lot of people don't realize transhumanism goes that far back. But it would make sense that they would want to use this cloning technology because they needed more soldiers, especially super soldiers for World War II. Early on, Adolf Hitler impressed senior Thule Society members with his exophobic commitment to an Aryan racial supremacy, his mesmerizing oratory, and his occult understanding of the future man, or Ubermensch, Superman. They arranged for him to be the new head of the new Socialist Government Workers' Party, and they started the Anunnurbe, which is ancestral heritage and research, as well as looking into exotic energy forces such as Virilia. They went on the SS Anunnurbe, led scientific expeditions to remote locations such as Tibet in 1938 in an attempt to unlock the mysterious power and potential of the human mind. They were also interested in the ET origin of the Aryans and the ancient UFO crafts called Vimanas, or ET artifacts from an antediluvian civilization. They were looking into all this stuff. So the technology of the Antarctic Germans was far beyond anything that they could handle. The USA tried penetrating the base with a naval task force, of course, in Operation High Jump, and was sent packing. By 1949, the USSR tested their first nuclear bomb. There is evidence that it shows that the United States gave the Soviet Union the plans. Could it be that they were both trying to spread out weapons technology so they could keep the Antarctic Germans in check? If there are more people that are standing up against a foe, then there are better chances of coming out ahead. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And they both knew, both the Soviet Union and the US NATO bloc knew that just because the Third Reich and the fighting forces of Germany surrendered, well, actually, the Third Reich never did surrender, nor did the SS. Just the fighting forces, the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The rest went underground. And this is known as the Third Force or the Fourth Reich. And they have remained in existence in Antarctica, but also in the micronations of South America to this very day. In fact, I heard a joke when I was in South America on my drive down to Ushuaia, where I catch the boat to go sailing to Antarctica 7 years ago. And the people of Southern South America, particularly Chile and Argentina, they're kind of having an existential crisis about themselves because they've virtually wiped out all the Native American inhabitants, unlike Peru and Bolivia, where there's still a very large indigenous population. But only 1% of indigenous people remain in the population of Chile and Argentina. So they're asking themselves, well, who are we as Argentinians? And largely they're Southern European immigrants that make up the majority of the people in Chile and Argentina. And so the joke is, when asked, who are we? Well, we're Italians who speak Spanish, but wish that we were as rich as the Germans. Because still to this day, Michael, the Germans have all the money down there, and they're the ones that run the corporations and everything else. So there really is a Fourth Reich, and they have been in existence since the end of World War II.
And I actually had an interesting thought pop in my head, with history, with the Nazis having the black goo, New Schwabenland. I'm sure they had it during the war, that it wasn't just after the war. And so I can't help wondering if it was a clone of Hitler at the bomb that supposedly didn't kill him. And the found dead was his other clone, and he was in Argentina during the entire war. And we only knocked off clones, and that's why everybody is like, well, it's not 100% identifiable, but it is close. And so maybe I wonder if that's, an effect, that those were goo Hitlers and not the Hitler.
Goo Hitlers, I like that. Yeah, that's a good point, Michael. Hard to say, but they were working with the black goo. And so in my research, I found out that even at the very end of World War II, so in the late or mid 1940s, but even slightly after that, when still there were a lot of Germans who were able to leave war-torn Europe, they were heading down to not only South America, some were going to Antarctica, but then others were going to these islands, including the Falklands. And they even set up a submarine base in the Falkland Islands. So another reason for the Falkland Wars is they still needed to dislodge that fifth column, as it were, that was still embedded into Argentina, including in the Falklands. So the British took over the Falklands, and that was basically the last you heard of those colonists. But by then, by 1982, I'd say we're already talking about second generation. Now we're talking about third generation Antarctica Germans. And this is starting to come out in the fore, largely through Stuart Swerdlow. He was one of the surviving Montauk boys. Well, he's been going on the interview circuit lately and talking about how he knows someone who's an Antarctica German, was born down there, is multi-generations. And he says that they really want to come out. They want to tell the world. They want to join into this community, but they don't know how the rest of the world is going to respond when they hear that they're the Fourth Reich. And that's the words he used. They even call themselves the Fourth Reich. And they don't like the word Nazi anymore. They prefer to go by Antarctica Germans. And they're still there, same location. When I was looking at maps before my trip, I was looking at Cold War era maps. And I was surprised to see in the area of New Schwabenland, which on globes or on other maps was called Queen Maud Land. It's the area of Antarctica directly below South Africa, which South Africa was also sympathetic to the Germans. And they would use South Africa as a final supply depot before the ships and submarines would head to New Schwabenland. But I'm looking at these maps from the Cold War era, and I was amazed to see the West German flag on bases in New Schwabenland after the war. They never left, not even on the surface. Now it's unified Germany flag, and they're still there.
Yeah, and you know what I find interesting with when it comes to like the Germans is during the war they started out really strong and then production just faltered, and I often found that to be quite an odd thing because if you're gonna start a war, you don't start a war by putting out all your pieces and then hope you never have to recreate any that they're gonna hold. You know, you had the production behind it, but Germany didn't. And I've often thought that was the strangest thing. And now finding out they have bases on the moon and Antarctica, it's like it's almost like they started the war to go, look over here while we go over here. And it was the biggest false flag, as we would call it today, of the illusion behind the war is, they really didn't want to start the war, but they needed something to say, hey, everybody, look over here while we do something over here.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Or don't look down in Antarctica where we're starting to expand into a colony. And that's exactly what New Schwabenland was. It was not only a military base, it was not only a science city, the New Berlin city under the ice, but it was a colony for people to relocate and for multi-generations to live. Because got to understand that Antarctica is the most volcanically active continent in the world. There are 14 known active volcanoes down there, as well as 93 known geothermal vents. And while I could tell you, because I went down there, that there's no trees, there's nothing green, it would be very, very difficult to grow anything on the surface. But underneath, you've got an energy source. So you could grow hydroponically. You've got flowing water down there, so you can water the plants. As long as you can create artificial light, we know that you can do that with grow rooms with special bulbs, that you could grow your own food and you could live down there and nobody would know you're there because you can't see them with radar or drones or any other way. So what a perfect place to hide out. And I think that's exactly what they did for the last 80 years.
And I just had an interesting thought as you were talking about that pop in my head of, do we even know if this black goo, because it's sentient, needs sleep or food? Because if it doesn't need food, then if you're around somebody who never eats, your chances are you're by somebody who's a black goo clone. But it seems like a silly question, but in my mind, it's like, this is a sentient being that, has its own existence. How much is it modifying to exist here?
Yeah. Yeah, good point. And so when it's frozen, it's inert. Can't really do anything. So maybe when it is in a frozen state, it's not hungry or needs to ingest anything. But when it gets warmed up, then it wants to join. And so one of the eyewitnesses on the British ships that were taking it back to the UK would say that if you put your finger over a tank of it, it would just start rising up, like it saw you and knew that it could try to get into you any which way. If you just touch it, maybe then you touch your skin and it gets in, or maybe even right through your finger. So it wants to live, it wants to feed, and presumably that food source is us.
And with Hollywood, they're now putting out like the Transformer movies where vehicles become robots. I can't help wondering, if this black goo is like an oil, if somebody was to accidentally put it in a car, what would happen to that car? Because it now has a sentient consciousness in it. So would it become like they're saying, a robot that can change and drive itself and, do whatever? Or, would it just sit there and be like, what am I doing with this? There's nothing here I can eat. So I'm stuck here until somebody opens it up and tries to drain the oil, and then I can go to them.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that we're always burning oil and burning gas and petroleum products? Isn't that a way to kill it if you burn it off? And I don't know to what
Yeah.
degree it's flammable or not. That would be another question I'd like to ask someone else.
And I can't help too thinking, if we turn it into a fuel source, would how renewable and how free energy wise is that fuel source, but at what cost?
Good point. Yeah, exactly. And then does it burn like regular oil? And if it does that kill the black goo? What happens when it gets into our body? Does that make us flammable? Is that what spontaneous combustion's been all about this whole time? I don't know. Good questions, Michael.
And do you think ever that we're going to find out, like, they show the pictures of the moon bases and everybody's walking around like no uniforms, and we figure, well, they're in a contained, building, apparently pressurized, we think of it that way, but could they be black goo? And because the black goo came from outer space, extraterrestrial wise, doesn't need oxygen like we do, or can they function in space without air? And that's who's operating on the moon.
I like your way of thinking. And that could be why these super soldiers that were on the panel with me in December in the UK, why they said they were required to ingest it, is that it would give them that extra stamina or that ability to withstand pressurized and really tightly fitting compartmentalized quarters. And perhaps that's how it's been weaponized as well, by using it in these secret space programs.
Yeah, because I've been told, dealing with the secret space program, that there are altars that are based on the goo, that they are required and operate through the goo. And so those all tend to be as what we would coin as the malevolent program. And so I can't help wondering, as much as we, say is natural here, is it really natural, or did it come here millions of years ago, like around the age of the dinosaurs time, and it's just been lying in wait, and we think it's sentient to Earth because it's been here, but it's really not from here?
Yeah, well, and that's what this article, Coevolution by Alex Newald in Nexus Magazine, explored, that it was brought here by a benevolent race. They did not want it to get out or break loose, but just to be used in the event that Earth needed to be populated in a hurry. That if we were going to be attacked by another ET race who would try to take over, that they could still populate us with humans very quickly. And it turns out that's what it is really good for too. You can still use it to rapidly clone.
And I wonder if there's a frequency involved, because we have Project Blue Beam, which blue has a frequency, and black goo, so the black would have a frequency. If there's, because I'm starting to notice there's like colors always being associated with things now. If that's a frequency thing, and not just, someone being lazy and going, well, this is goo and it looks black, so let's just call it black goo. So, is there a reason behind the color frequencies with it?
One of the whistleblowers, according to Miles Johnston, said it had a slightly brown tint to it. That it was largely black, but it was a little bit brown, unlike petroleum oil that gets pumped out of the ground. And in the Black Goo chapter, I do have a Q&A with Miles Johnston, who is one of the leading researchers and event producers of the Bases Project, where he brings in other eyewitnesses and testimony and super soldiers, such as Max Spears, who died with a black substance coming out of his mouth, and also David Griffin, who had eyewitness reports and knew people that were in the ship that took the black goo back, and Harold Kotzvela, who has spoken quite extensively about the black goo. So it was great to have the support of Miles Johnston in this book to give me a better understanding of what the black goo is all about, how it's been used and backward engineered. And they're trying to, now I think it's being weaponized and being sprayed on the rest of us in the form of chemtrails, because you get other researchers that are finding it in these water samples after a heavy spray day and it rains, and they find these little nanobots in a petri dish. It's like, go figure. Now they're using it against us.
Well, and I would hope they would have an antibody, like we would call to the virus.
Yeah.
Whenever they create these viruses, they always create an antibody to it. So if they're unleashing this goo, I would hope they have an anti-goo as well. So, they're not just releasing something and crossing their fingers and going, I hope it doesn't come back to bite us. It's like,
they have an antidote.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet they do. But as of right now, there is no cure for Morgellons, that it just gets into the system and it continues to survive and even multiply. And we know that the food supply has been tainted. It's coming down in the air, and even they're putting it in water. So nanobots are being found in water, and then in these things that everybody got injected with 5 years ago, it's in the graphene oxide. And DARPA has created ferrofluids, which is also a derivative of the black goo.
And, talking about the food being contaminated, it's like, even when you have people who pass the organic standards and they're like, yeah, you're not putting anything artificial in, all the land around them has artificial. And so I started thinking about it one day and going, how ridiculous is this to have a non-organic farm right against an organic farm, because it's not like the water is seeping down and going, oh wait, this is an organic farm, let's scoot around the perimeter of this and flow off. It's going through the organic. So do we really even have truly any organic available opportunity, because the water, goes through everything and carries everything.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. I think you can make a good argument that everything that we rely upon to survive has been tainted, from the air and the chemtrails to the soil of GMOs to the water we drink with fluoride and other nanobots. People have done. Mike Adams from the Health Ranger, he opened up a chicken McNugget and put it under a microscope, and he saw these fibers in there. So it's definitely being tainted in the food, and
Yeah.
other different food sources. They're finding all kind of parasitic and fibrous material that's being given to us, and we're taking it regularly. Once again, it's like the revelation of the method. You know, you're not eating healthy food when you go to a fast food restaurant. So, hey, why not load it up with Morgellons and nanobots and other pathogens? And
Yeah.
that's part of the depopulation agenda.
And I always find it funny when I watch commercials for the fast food places like McDonald's back in the late 90s, early 2000s was, hey, we're now making chicken nuggets with real chicken. And I'm like, everybody was applauding that. And I was like, what? Why are you applauding this and not asking what were we eating? Because you told us it was chicken. Now you're saying it is chicken, and so what? And or like the fries, where they say now real potato fries. It's like, what was it before?
Yeah.
It's like nobody seems to care what it was before. They're all celebrating. Oh, good, now it's this, and it's like, how, why is it the brain of some people is like, great, we now can get real chicken nuggets. I've been eating them for years, but now it's real chicken, so I'm happy. Versus other people who are like, wait a second, what the hell have you been feeding me then, telling me it's chicken when it's not chicken?
Now, supposedly, Kentucky Fried Chicken changed their name to KFC because their chickens are so genetically modified, they can't even be considered to be chickens anymore. So they had to change their name. Great.
Well, not only that, but their latest commercial scheme, the prior one, if you remember, went super dark, where they took a man and dipped him into a lake of gravy and he came out like a chicken leg or something. And I was like, that is not cool. And I was like, so glad I had stopped eating KFC before I seen that commercial. And I have a KFC up this road, and I'm like, every time I go, I kind of miss the KFC. I'll flash that picture of that commercial. I'm like, and I'm just gonna keep living with the memory of it long ago. I will not go in, because it's like, you made me just realize you're serving me human food. No.
It's not food anymore. Or maybe we can just respell it PHOOD.
Yeah. Or call it Soylent Green again.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's funny.
So I'm also a little bit curious your thoughts on how and why is the black goo becoming so prevalent now, that a lot of people are now starting to look into it and research it, when like you're saying, it's been around since the 40s and probably before that. So what going on today do you feel is why such a surgence of everybody wants to know now about the goo?
Well, it's kind of percolating up to the surface. I think it's been used in so many different movies and TV shows that now it's getting out into the wider population, and people are just asking questions. What is this stuff for real? Because they've seen it so much in X-Files and different movies and so forth. They're wondering, is this stuff actually real? And I think sadly the answer is yes.
Well, and on that note too, is as we're talking about, a lot of people are talking about ascension right now, and we're in 4D, moving to 5D and everything. Does the goo go through the same process we go through, and like can raise its vibration and match to 5D, 6D, or is it stuck in 3 or 4D and is limiting us to staying here, and that's its goal, and not continue?
Yeah, yeah, good question. And I can't pretend I know the answer, but I would wager to bet that it's probably a low vibration life form. If it's like the blob and it just wants to consume and eat and is no regard for its victims, that it's probably a low vibration 3D, maybe 4D at the most, but I doubt it.
Which then makes me think of that one episode, Star Trek. Just I'm using that as a reference with the Next Generation, where they had the entity feeding off of the ship because of it needed the nutrients, and they got it to detach by quote unquote souring the milk. And so I wonder if there's a point where, if we go to 5, 6, 7D, like you're saying, if this is low vibration, at what point do we become sour milk to it? And it's like, I can't feed on you anymore. I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, no kidding. Uh, Again, good question. I don't think I can really say precisely how or why it has a consciousness, even. But everything I've read about it and heard from other speakers is that it has a form of sentience, that it is alive and it is actually conscious of its behavior, and it's programmable. It's a programmable life form, and that's how it can be used in these rapid cloning operations.
I don't know if you saw Star Trek Discovery and Starfleet Academy that they just came out with, but one of the big things, and you talking about it being programmable, made me think about this. Is one of the big things is all the ships and all their equipment is created by programmable matter, that
Hmm.
they have this pad and they go, hey, I need a phaser, and all of a sudden a phaser will just manifest in front of them being operational. Or we need the warp nacelles to be free floating but attached to the ship, and so there's like an energy that holds it together, and it can change shape at will. And when you were saying that, it's like my mind automatically went to, is that what they were trying to show us in Star Trek, is using the goo to make these everything to where we just ask it to be something and it programs itself to it?
Yeah, it could be that too. What I meant by programmable is that, let's say we're like this, the blue ETs that were here in support of the human race, and they needed to clone a whole bunch of different humans that could be let loose on the surface and reproduce and continue the human race, that they could program the black goo to copy our human genome. And that's what could be programmed, as far as thinking about a computer programmer is putting in code and how they want their software to operate. In the same way, putting their code into a clone and how it's going to operate.
Yeah, that's true. And it also could explain, I almost wonder with Aldous Huxley, I believe, was the author of Brave New World, where they were creating perfect humans, if that was a nod to the future with the goo, is we can create individuals that are going to be accountants or going to be engineers, and they're going to be perfectly suited to that. But then, you know, the odd question that comes up is, because a lot of people talk about like the Zetas are humans who underwent a change and now they can't reproduce, so they're coming back to try and fix that mistake. Was the mistake ingesting and getting involved with the black goo, and the black goo doesn't reproduce, and so it destroys that part of humanity?
Yeah. Or destroys the host, which further suggests that it's a low vibration substance, that it will just take over the host, maybe spit out a few clones, but then the host dies. So
Yeah.
very parasitic in that sense.
And another way to look at it too is, I'm sure you're familiar with the Stargate series, where the Gould is viewed as a parasite, like a snake that enters the body and keeps it healthy for a certain amount of time and then gets a new host after. Could what we're calling the snake be the goo? And the goo takes over and keeps you fit, rules like a god, and then when the body no longer is useful to it, just sheds it and gets a new one.
Or like Jesus said, be as wise as a serpent and as gentle as a lamb, but wise as a serpent. So that might be the sentience of serpents. Of course, are mythical creatures, but in a way, so is the black goo. But they're both supposed to be wise and sentient. So could be a parallel there. The snakes, as you just mentioned.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing all of this with us. And I want to give you time to promote anything you have coming up or any books that you have coming out.
Oh yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, this is my 11th book. Just came out at the beginning of this year. My 12th book is called Underwater Archaeology, which I'm working on. It'll probably be a 2028 release. But the premise is that there was a high-tech civilization on this earth, because how can you create megalithic or other structures that are now submerged under the ocean unless the ocean levels were much lower than they were today when these constructions were built? So that'll be a cool book. And of course, I'll come back on with you and we'll talk about that. But right now, I'm doing a whole lot of interviews. This is already my second of the day. And I got a whole bunch of conferences coming up, including 2 this month, which is I'm going to the Bay Area, California, for the new Life Expo in San Rafael. That'll be the weekend after next. And then right after that is the New York Awakening Conference on Long Island. That's at the end of April. Then I come back for that. I go down to Sedona for Rise of the Guardians Conference. Then I fly out to Germany, where I'm given this presentation on the secrets of Antarctica about German craft in Antarctica, as well as the submarines. And I'm also going to be at Contact in the Desert at the end of May. I just saw they released their panels. I'm on a panel called Taboo Archaeology, which will be one day at Contact in the Desert. And then in June, I'm flying out to Bosnia for the Bosnian Pyramid Conference with Billy Carson and Dr. Sam. And then we're going to tour around and check out some megaliths and some spherical objects in Bosnia. That's going to be a great trip. So I got a very busy schedule coming up, trying to build some structures on my land out here in Nevada. But boy, I'm so busy, it's hard to supervise. In fact, I got 2 guys right now putting a new roof on an old barn of mine. So got to get back and help them with that. But
Yeah,
thanks so much for having me on, Michael. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
yes, and thank you. And as I said in the beginning, I'll reiterate it. And the way I like to close my shows now is my heart and the heart of my shows to you. Thank you for what you're doing for humanity. It's seen, heard, and felt, and much appreciated.
Thank you, Michael. Much appreciation to you too.
Yes, and be sure to like and follow along because you never know when Brad will be making another appearance on this show. And follow along with him because his presentations, I can tell you, never disappoint. They are
Michael.
amazing.
Hey, I should also point out that I always bring books to my presentations and conferences. So come over to my booth. You can get a signed copy of any of my books, as well as CCC Publishing is the name of our publishing website. And that's the only other place you can get a signed copy of any of my books. So if any of your authors want to pick up a copy of Secrets of Antarctica, CCC Publishing is the way to do it. Or go to bradolsen.com, the way my name is spelled. And that's my conference schedule coming up. And that's where you can get more information about those conferences and buy tickets as well.
Yeah, so thank you. And do everybody go and support his books because they are phenomenal. They have so much information and pictures to go with it. And I will say, Brad, as a writing style that I find yours is similar is you write in such a way that you read and you understand everything and it's not overwhelming and it's not super technical or like you feel like you're being dumbed down because you don't understand what you're talking about, that you write so relatable, and I think that's a gift, so thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you for making note of that.
Yes, and so we are almost out of time, and so I'm going to let you go so you can go take care of your structures. And I cannot imagine how you get writing done with all your appearances as well. And so you must be one of those that needs very little sleep.
Oh, no, I get tired. I might even take a nap today somehow, but yep, got to get it done. So that's what I do.
Yes. Well, thank you for coming on and thank you for being a wonderful guest. And it's, as you said, it's always a pleasure having you on. And I even now, when I go on episodes where I do interviews, if it's the first, I will coin and say, as my friend who was the first guest on mine, I'm the first. You know, I remember that.
Never
I
forget your
appreciate
first
that.
time. That's true. Absolutely.
So have a
Uh,
wonderful week, Brad, and blessings to you.
Thank you, Michael. You too.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Over and out.